Hello and welcome to Tech Latest from Nikkei Asia, where we usually bring you fresh updates from the Asian tech sector. But since this will be our last episode of the year, we will be looking back at the year that was and a glimpse into what we believe will be important topics in 2026. We're your hosts, Shotaro, Tani, and
Katey, Creel.
So, Katey, as our tech editor, you must have overseen hundreds of Asian tech stories this year. What stood out to you the most?
Yeah, 100 sounds about right, including number of scoops, including, I think one of my favorite is the Apple preparing for a foldable iPhone as early next year. The data leak cases involving TSMC, Intel, and Tokyo Electron were pretty fun. We had a really big deep dive on ASML and China's attempt to build its own version of the Dutch chip equipment maker. So it's been a busy, very varied year. But there are two topics I would like to talk about a bit more in depth.
Yeah, go for it.
The first one is casting us back to the very beginning of the year, the DeepSeek shock, which I had to actually double check was indeed this year and not the previous year.
Yeah, it seems like a while back. So remind people what DeepSeek was.
So DeepSeek is a Chinese AI startup. And on one of our first stories, the headline was DeepSeek, NVIDIA killer or overhyped. And since it's been about a year since we wrote that, I think we can safely answer that and say neither. So, of course, at the time, it was a big shock because this is we're a couple years into the AI tech investment boom, stock market's up, everyone's happy, NVIDIA's doing fantastic. And at the time, everyone knew that better AI would always need better chips, more power, more. And, stock market had been rising for 2 years on that thinking. And then comes along this company that few people outside of or even really inside of China had ever heard of, saying, actually, no, there's another way. We can train and deploy models more cheaply, more efficiently, and we're going to, charge for services, a tiny fraction of what OpenAI, I think something like 96% less than what OpenAI was charging to use its models. So it was putting its money where its mouth was. We are cheap. And that announcement really came out of nowhere, and it sent NVIDIA's stock price plunging. Do you know how much it lost in market cap in one day?
No, but it must have been loads. Remind me.
600 billion, the biggest single day loss in U.S. market history.
I just can't fathom that number that big.
Yeah, so there was a lot of kind of hand-wringing panic. But of course, now NVIDIA is still around, share price is recovered, and it's up, I think, something like 20% this year. So, no need to shed a tear for Jensen Huang. He's doing fine.
Absolutely.
Because part of that is people realize that even if you make AI more efficient or, there are cheaper versions, people will not use less of it. They'll actually use more. Whenever you make something more efficient, people just eat it up faster. So there's still a lot of appetite for NVIDIA's chips, their GPUs. And, so in that sense, no, DeepSeek was not a NVIDIA killer. But I'd also say it wasn't overhyped. And that's because it did arguably kick off the AI race within China. It really spurred companies like Alibaba and Baidu to get their own models out, to get really competitive, to deploy them and show applications. And so now I think it really also just forced the world to wake up to the fact that China could compete in this field. It made it a kind of worthy rival in the AI race against the US.
After all that shock, where is DeepSeek now? We've obviously, not heard as much from them recently.
It's been a bit quieter, partly because the bigger players, like I mentioned, Alibaba, are rolling out their own large language models, their own chatbots, putting them into their own products. I think the biggest AI model in China now by users is ByteDance's. So it's, DeepSeek's still like number 2 or number 3, so it's still not going away.
Right.
But going back, is DeepSeek going to be an NVIDIA killer? The challenge for NVIDIA now is still from China, but not from necessarily DeepSeek, but the rise of AI chip designers. And we just had more threads and MetaX list trying to get into the AI, or they are getting into the AI GPU design business, and investors seem pretty excited about them. So I think that might be what NVIDIA should be worried about now, not necessarily DeepSeek.
And what was the other one that you wanted to talk about?
The second topic is near to my heart, as I'm a big fan of being employed. It's AI and jobs.
Aren't we all?
Yes. So one of the biggest questions with the generative AI boom when that came out is, if AI can do everything, where does that leave workers, especially white collar, tech workers, journalists, creatives? And it's a question, obviously, we're still seeing answers to, trying to find out more. And one of the first pieces we did on this topic, at least that I was involved in, I thought was really interesting because it looked at the legal profession in South Korea, which is rather unique in Asia. I think they only introduced US-style law schools about 15, 16 years ago. There's a very clear divide between like old guard professionals and the newer generations of lawyers. So already that was a very interesting market. And then along comes AI. So there's apps that you can, kind of like matching apps. So it'll match lawyers with prospective clients or the other way around. Other apps that just help cut down on like research workloads and just help the law firms be more efficient. And a lot of the younger generation were really, embracing this. They're quite happy. It's, feels like it's helping them compete against more established players, the older generation. And of course, the more established lawyers feel like it's a threat to their profession. It's not proven yet. We shouldn't be rushing to embrace it. So really kind of expose a lot of the questions and themes around AI as a tool. Another market we looked at was India. And we actually took 2 good swipes at this topic. I think India is a market where people expected there'd be just kind of a bloodbath in terms of job cuts from AI, given the country's dependence on IT outsourcing as a job creation. But we've actually seen that, there might have been some cuts, anecdotally. And certainly I think hiring has been slower than it might have otherwise been. But there's also been a lot of startups and smaller companies really embracing AI tools, like ChatGPT, Sora, 11 Labs. Just saying, it makes them much more productive. They can, reach more audiences with things like podcasts and videos. It helps them do more. And so there's an argument that's actually creating some jobs because younger companies can now grow much more quickly.
Are the jobs being taken away outpacing the jobs being created, or?
The numbers are kind of unclear on that. And partly companies don't want to often say, we're cutting these people and replacing them with AI because it'll make politicians and, general public quite mad at you. And of course, there's also other reasons companies might cut workers. Just trade war, growth might just be a bit weaker in general. So it's hard to blame everything on AI. So it's not really one-to-one comparison.
No, the jury's still out. But I guess what people were saying when AI just started becoming more popular is that that history shows that. When new technology comes around, yes, there will inevitably be job losses related to that, but then there will be new jobs to, accommodate those new technologies, which I think is kind of playing out here as well.
Yeah, and that's actually a theme in the second feature from India that we ran just a few weeks ago, and that's the rise of the data annotation segment of the job market. So basically outsourcing tech work to human workers to kind of sort, tag, or even create real-world data, looking at videos and saying, oh, this person is smiling or frowning, or navigating around a city to get interactive video. And companies are outsourcing this to Asia because they need this kind of clean, really quality data to train their AI models on. And it's obviously cheaper to outsource this than do it in places like the US or Europe. So India is really benefiting from this. And there's one estimate that this segment is going to grow 14-fold in about 10 years to $7 billion. So AI is definitely having positives as well as maybe not so positive.
And what's the meme doing the rounds in India? AI is?
Actually Indians. Though our reporter there says that actually predates the current buzz. So it's been around for a bit.
Fair enough.
Yeah. So those are my big topics for the year. What caught your eye this year?
So 2 topics from me as well. The first one kind of overlaps with what you said about AI. I think there was, I think robotics, industrial robots are, fast becoming the norm. I mean, in Japan, you go to restaurants and the catering robots with,
the cat ears.
the cat ears, cutesy ones. They're everywhere now. And my colleague Tsubasa, he recently went to a robotics show in Japan, and he interviewed the CEO of a Chinese robot maker called Pudu. And there's actually a video on our website, which I saw is just 4-legged wheeled robot that's, going up the stairs like as if the stair's not there, basically. It's, it's super smooth and it's eerie in a way, but it just shows how far robotics have come from, when we were marveling at, the Boston Dynamics. I still remember the days when, Boston Dynamics were putting out these videos that they were kicking the dog-shaped robots and they were withstanding the kicks.
Yeah.
And we've come to, we've reached a stage where these robots are just, acting so naturally in these environments. So I think the robotics, and especially humanoid robotics as well, are here to stay and will proliferate even further going into the future. And I think there was a stat in our recent piece about how Goldman Sachs and Bank of America have estimated that humanoid robot shipments will reach about 18,000 to 20,000 units this year. And that's up from about 3,000 units, only 3,000 units in 2024. So you can see the huge ramp up. But then
phenomenal growth.
Yeah, phenomenal growth. And then when you couple that with, the rapid development in AI, I'm just curious to see, how this sector evolves together and what applications there are for these, robotics and AI.
I think it's an excellent point. A lot of AI companies and chip companies lately have been making a point that they see physical AI as the next big growth market, and they, obviously want to keep selling their AI chips. But world probably needs so many data centers, but they see robotics as maybe a new kind of growth stream for them. So
yeah, and we have to keep our fingers crossed that we don't, reach that Terminator-esque world, right?
Well, as long as they don't put guns on that dog robot, I think we'll be safe.
But I think military use is something that's always been talked about in this space, right? And so, I mean, never
I think
say
drones are probably more the application.
True. Yeah, true.
Which is also another very quickly evolving segment. It's drones and the counter drone technology. We had a piece earlier this year about a Australian-based company trying to keep up on the anti-drone front as others, especially China, are really ramping up on just the drone technology.
And there was an interest, I don't know if we translated this, but we had on our Japanese Nikkei talking about how the AI companies are increasingly tapping into people who specialize in philosophy. Because a lot of these difficult questions that AI will have to answer going forward, a lot of that boils down to, philosophical questions. The famous trolley question: do you save the one man or the five man? So that's something to keep forward. The AI might be taking away jobs, as you said, Katey, but the people who have studied philosophy are in huge demand right now. So
finally, a renaissance in the philosophical hiring market.
So that's my first topic. Another topic is a bit closer to my heart, as I primarily cover energy here at Nikkei Asia. And again, it kind of relates back to the AI theme as well. But data centers and energy is, I think, was a fascinating area this year. The data center, it's basically a boom all around the world and fueling these AIs going forward. And we are going to need ever more energy to meet all that demand. And the question has always been, where do we get that? And we can't really rely on building out more fossil fuel-based power plants for obvious environmental reasons. And so that's partly kind of fueling interesting new forms of producing energy. One that I've covered before, and this relates to the Japanese context, is perovskite solar cells, which keen listeners may remember we did a podcast episode about. It's super thin solar cells, and the selling point is basically you can, hang it on walls or, plaster them onto places that you can't really put regular solar panels on. So everywhere basically becomes like a solar power plant. Yeah,
the photos of that technology were amazing. It was just so thin. You couldn't imagine it actually being a solar producing or a solar cell.
Exactly. And the efficiency is getting close to the actual solar panels. So it's rapidly developing, and Japan wants to push this technology because, one, there's basically a lack of space to put additional solar panels on, and two, it's a Japanese technology basically. So they want to support the development of this technology. So I don't think it'll be mass produced or it'll produced in huge quantities yet to power all these new data centers coming online, but it can, act as an additional, important additional power source for these data centers. Another new technology that I've been looking into recently, which I haven't really written about yet, but will do next year, hopefully, fingers crossed, is nuclear fusion. Nuclear fusion is different from the conventional nuclear fission. Nuclear fission is you split atoms into two, and then that releases massive amounts of energy, and that's how conventional nuclear power plants work. Nuclear fission is you merge the two cells together, typically deuterium and tritium. Hope I said that
Good
correctly.
pronunciation. Yeah.
And that also produces huge amounts of energy. It's basically trying to mimic the reaction that's happening on the sun,
Right.
or inside of the sun, rather.
So is one of the biggest hurdles is the temperatures involved, or what is the
I mean, there's
roadblock?
everything is a roadblock, basically. I mean, the technology has been studied for decades, but only recently are we really seeing enough progression in, materials. And I mean, AI is obviously helping simulating these technologies as well. And there was a Japanese nuclear fusion startup called Helical Fusion. They just signed their first power purchase agreement with a supermarket chain in Nagoya recently, which is the first in Japan, and I believe only the third PPA agreement in the world. So, and in the US, you have the nuclear fusion companies signing PPAs with the likes of Microsoft and Google, saying we're going to power you guys with nuclear fusion technology. So it's not something that, all the governments around the world are obviously pushing for this technology, including China. US is a front runner. Japan is also a front runner. And Japan is aiming to show that this technology actually works and can produce energy within the 2030s. So it's still a bit, it's a technology that's still a bit, far out.
Right. But you got serious players backing it.
Exactly.
Really betting on it,
Serious players backing it. Loads of investments going in as well. So this is something definitely to keep an eye on going forward. But those were the two things that I covered this year and were interested in.
I really like the perovskite story. Just again, it's such an interesting technology, and would love to see it deployed more. So hope we can follow up on that next year as well.
Maybe we should have one in our own office.
That would be very nice. Yeah. Another topic we've talked about kind of over the course of the year is China's chip self-sufficiency. So this is something that I know you don't directly cover, but we've just had a lot of good stories on it. What's your kind of struck you about our coverage of it this year?
I mean, this is more, towards the end of this year, so it's not throughout the course of this year. But when Trump, I think, recently allowed the exports or lifted the embargoes of NVIDIA's H200 chips, it's NVIDIA's second best generation of AI chips to China. That was a huge news in itself. But then China, I think our sister publication, the FT, had a story saying China is, recommending AI data centers run by state-owned enterprises to use domestic semiconductors and maybe restricting access to NVIDIA's H200 chips. So that kind of, the CEO of NVIDIA was, pushing hard for US to lift its AI chip exports ban, basically saying that if we ban the exports, then China would develop its own technology and end up not using US technology, and that's going to be a loss for American businesses, which is, kind of, we're seeing it play out right now, right? So, which I thought was
we've seen that played over the years with the crackdown of Huawei, for example.
Yeah, exactly.
Has definitely not gotten rid of Huawei, and I think a lot of people argue, analysts and industry people say, it just made Huawei stronger.
Yeah, exactly.
The Nietzsche quote. The interesting thing, though, about the H200 ban being lifted is it's actually the second time, basically, this has happened. Because I believe it was August, sometime in the summer, Trump also said you can sell the H20 in China. And Beijing did the same thing, to actually, kind of leaned on companies that, we want domestic companies to use domestic chips. And so I think shortly after that Trump announcement, too, Beijing said, we have security concerns about the H20. So NVIDIA's future in China and whether it can claw back any market share would be quite interesting. And Jensen Huang has often said their market share in China went from 95% for high-end AI chips to 0. So I doubt they'll ever get back to 95%. As we said earlier, there's new chip players coming in. Beijing's been pushing domestic solutions. But I think it'll probably get above 0 at some point.
Yeah, for sure. But the fact that, China's being able to build this domestic supply chain of chip manufacturing, I think you edited a great story on ASML primarily, but looking at how, China's trying to build its own version of ASML, I think that was fascinating.
That was a really technical, in-depth dive, and I learned a lot. The graphics were pretty amazing. So it was the extreme ultraviolet lithography, and that's one of the most, if not the most complicated machines ever built. And you're seeing the photos of its sheer size and all the things that go into it was really, that was a fun piece.
Yeah. Now, for those of you who haven't looked at it, I suggest you do go and take a look at it because the graphics are super amazing.
Yeah, words fail.
So that was a brief look at the year that was. Katey, what are some of the things that you were keeping an eye out for in 2026?
So actually, one of the topics that you were interested in this year is the data center boom, the building boom. As you mentioned, it's running full steam ahead pretty much everywhere. But we've had a really interesting kind of diversion between places like Japan, which is actually struggling to keep up with the pace of building for structural reasons, not enough workers, they're not digitizing their workflow, quickly enough in the construction industry. So people still really want to build data centers in Japan. Can Japan keep up and deliver on time? That's something we'll have to see.
Mm-hmm.
Malaysia also just has come almost out of nowhere in about 4 or 5 years, from basically no data centers to now it's one of the leading data center hubs in the region. It's going to have something like 5 gigawatts of capacity coming online in just one state.
Wow.
Yeah.
In one state?
Johor, right next to Singapore. It's kind of
right.
the taking advantage of its proximity, land, energy resources, water. But there's also questions, about ultimate demand. Are there going to be enough customers for all this capacity? Is it going to strain energy grids and water supplies too much? So kind of the environmental impact as the investment boom rumbles on is going to collide with a maybe realization that we only need actually so many data centers. What's on your radars?
So there's actually a memory shortage going on at the moment because of all the AI boom. And this is having a massive impact on my personal life because I'm a gamer.
Okay.
And I have a gaming PC. Not the typical massive gaming PCs, but there's a niche market segment called handheld gaming PCs, which actually quite a lot of companies are now getting into. But basically the chip shortage, because all the AI companies are buying all the memories, that's, obviously leading to a massive price hike in memories, which is obviously going to lead to massive price hikes in, well, not just gaming PCs, but gaming consoles as well. And we've seen Nintendo shares. They just a couple of months ago released their Switch 2. That's going to be here. Nintendo shares have plunged nearly like 20% in a month after all this memory shortage came to the fore. So, my current gaming handheld PC is, I think, 4 years old, coming
ancient.
up to 4 years old, ancient in the gaming world. I was looking at buying a new one, and I know my wife listened to this, so this is the first time I'm telling you this. But so, yeah, I'd probably have to wait and see how the prices evolve over the coming months to see whether I can actually afford to buy a new one.
Yeah, or whether there will be enough memory, because one of our recent pieces looked at exactly this issue and said, for now it's bad enough that memory prices are going up, but if the trend continues and AI keeps sucking up memory, there's going to be some companies that will just not get the memory they need.
Yeah.
The bigger ones like Nintendo, I'm sure will be fine. They have leverage and bargaining power, but yeah, depending on how bad the shortage get, it could really disrupt some supply chains.
Yes, I'm just hoping the prices come down.
Yeah, well, what goes up
must come down. Another thing that is on my radar is the Southeast Asian tech scene, basically. So I used to be based in Indonesia.
Oh, that's right.
I forgot how many years ago. You forgot?
Yeah. Until you reminded me. No, I remember.
But I used to cover the tech scene there extensively when I was there. This was pre-pandemic. And it was booming. It was really booming. All the big investors were coming in. The Googles, the SoftBanks were coming and really fueling the growth in the startup ecosystem there. And Indonesia had like 4 unicorns, Gojek, Tokopedia, Bukalapak, and Traveloka. And they were basically the darlings of Southeast Asia's tech scene. But then COVID changed all that. A lot of startups, went bust, and, Gojek merged with Tokopedia, and now it's, in talks, reportedly, of a merger with Grab, its Singaporean rival. And, it's just, it's kind of, as someone who covered Southeast Asian tech scene back then, it's kind of interesting how the landscape has evolved from one that's really, really booming, banked on population growth and consumers and
lots of money. And there's a lot of liquidity.
Yeah, exactly.
This idea that we have to secure market share at all costs.
Yeah, exactly.
Profitability will come later.
But now, profitability didn't really come, partly because of COVID, and now they have to retrench, and there's loads of movements going on that kind of aftermath of all that. So I'm just interested to see how this Southeast Asian tech scene evolves from here.
Yeah, Southeast Asia is really a fascinating market. I think one thing I would add to that region is I really want to see how VinFast does next year. They are a really interesting company. They make EVs backed by, I believe it's Vietnam's richest man, or certainly one of, taking on Chinese EV makers, which we know are quite successful, not only in Vietnam, where VinFast is the clear leader, but across Southeast Asia. They're trying to break into Indonesia, Thailand, Philippines, places like that. And I think how they compete, and also just more broadly how Asian EV makers do, will be really fun to watch.
I agree.
Well, thanks, Shotaro. That was a really fun conversation. We
Thank
should
you,
do this more
Katey.
often.
Yeah, we should, yeah.
That's it for this week's episode. You can read all the stories and trends we talked about in this episode on our website, asia.nikkei.com. You can also subscribe to our weekly Tech Asia newsletter, which will be delivered to your inbox every Thursday. Thank you for tuning in, and see you in 2026.